Well, there's three types of self-talk. There is negative self-talk, like we've just talked about. There's motivational self-talk, and then there's instructional self-talk. For a long time, in probably up until the last 5 years, I think, again, going back to that 80s movie reference, I thought if I saw a player, struggling, it was my job to try and facilitate some of that positive self-talk. I've learned over time there are better ways, and that there are a lot of times our mind, as much as we try and say, I'm okay, I've got this, our mind will whisper or shout back, no, you don't, or you're not okay.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Ben Freakley. Ben is currently the Vice President of Performance and Wellbeing at University of Health and Performance, and was previously the head of mental performance for the MLB club, the Toronto Blue Jays. Ben has coached individuals, athletes, teams, soldiers, and businesses on the psychology of performance, leadership, team dynamics, and well-being. Along the way, Ben has been an NCAA Division I men's soccer coach, mental performance coach for Special Operation Forces, and general manager for a sports club with over 1,100 members. He is a certified mental performance coach and member of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. Ben holds master's degrees in sports psychology and sports management from Georgia Southern University, where he was also an athlete. He is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in sport and performance psychology with an emphasis in clinical mental health counseling. In part 2 of our conversation, we talk about the 3 types of self-talk, breaking out of negative self-talk, staying present, and their approach to mental performance and handling failure with the Blue Jays. Like always, if you enjoy this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF from this episode or any episode. And coaches, it's not too late to grab access to our summer coaching series. The SES includes 10 weekly presentations plus 2 bonus sessions with coaches and experts from across sports that are going to help you grow as a coach. The event is already underway, but you can purchase access and get all of the previous sessions, plus all the upcoming sessions, coaching notes, and more. Week 5 takes place on June 29th at 12 p.m. Central Time and features Brett Burchard, former NBA and NBA G League coach, presenting on applying mindset training, how to get more out of your athletes. You can learn more or get access at summercoachingseries.com. One final note about this episode before we hop in. This conversation was recorded live at a coaching convention, so there may be a bit of background noise at times, but we did our best to edit the audio to bring you the highest quality possible. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Ben Freakley. Enjoy the episode. I would love to talk more about the self-talk and the negative self-talk. And I love what you shared there around, the reality is coaches are performers too. And I think we forget that oftentimes, that in practice and in games, that's our performance. Like we need to be, like you said, you're working with a professional coach right now on his performance, not his team's, just his. And so how he can perform optimally in games and practices. Let's talk more about the negative self-talk, because I know personally, right, it's easy to get into a negative thought loop, or where you are just in your head and can't move beyond a mistake. But then, especially with the young people that I coach, man, you can see it, right? A kid comes out of the game, he's made a few mistakes, and he is down on himself in his head. The negative thoughts are swirling. I guess first, how do we fight that as coaches, and then how do we help our athletes?
Sure. Well, there's 3 types of self-talk. There is negative self-talk, like we've just talked about. There's motivational self-talk, and then there's instructional self-talk. For a long time, in probably up until the last 5 years, I think, again, going back to that 80s movie reference, I thought if I saw a player, struggling, it was my job to try and facilitate some of that positive self-talk. I've learned over time that there are better ways, and that there are a lot of times our mind, as much as we try and say, I'm okay, I've got this, our mind will whisper or shout back, no, you don't, or you're not okay. And I think a lot of times coaches, and I'm going to talk about this later on at one of my classroom sessions, but we have this tendency that Dr. Miller and Dr. Stephen Rolnick, the originators of this concept of motivational interviewing, they coined it the writing reflex, which is we see an individual struggling and we feel like it's our job to make it right. And we become fixers. And the more we do that, the more we take away an athlete or any human being's ability to solve their own problems, which a lot of time in coaches, I think is something that we'd like to do, is to empower them. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to goals and values. Saying to a player, don't worry about it, makes them worry about it more. Saying to a player, take a deep breath, is probably going to piss them off even more. Same thing with like saying relax. If they haven't been taught to do this, just like they've been taught to shoot a free throw or dribble to attack space or make a run in the box or run a route, if they haven't been taught to do this, those words are utterly useless. And so what I think coaches can do ahead of time proactively is, hey, let's look at your position and what are 2 or 3 things every time our team has the ball that you can do? And what are 2 or 3 things our team doesn't have the ball that you can do? And when we find a player struggling, rather than trying to get them out of their heads and into the game, which is the goal, those can be ways of kind of going back to some predetermined, preset strategies. I love the phrase structure lessens anxiety. So if we structure, hey, when my team has the ball, my job is to get into the attack. It's to make overlapping runs. It is to support the 7, the 9, the 10, whatever it is. When we don't have the ball, I should be about this distance from my other defenders. I should be communicating where threats are coming from. And I should be really aware of the space behind me. And so instead of trying to make a player feel better, when they're experiencing some very normal emotions that come with the game, can we go back and gently remind them to go back to some task-relevant cues that are going to direct their attention onto performance and less so onto their feelings?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really powerful because it's 2 things. One, bring back to this present moment. Hey, can you just answer like an informational question here, a question that they already know the answer to, and then it's future oriented. Okay, when you go back in or right now in this present moment, where should your focus be? And I think there's just a ton of power in having some of those structures. Again, back to kind of what we talked about with the halftime, having some sort of structure for these moments that inevitably are going to occur. I think is just really, really important that we have those as a coach. And then also we give our players those tools too to navigate those situations.
They need a framework. They need a framework that works for them. I recently learned a phrase, stress fingerprints. What are your stress fingerprints? And asking this to a player, asking a goalkeeper, what are some things that really get you on edge? Asking a center back or asking an attacking midfielder for whatever it is, like what are things? So they need to be very, very self-aware. And then they also need to know what type of attentional regulation strategies can work for them. And then this may take a recommitment 20 or 50 times over the game. But they need to have something to turn their attention to. They're winning 1-0 and there's 5 minutes left. Our mind's in the future. I hope we don't lose, right? And then that our body hears everything our mind says. And then we're tight, and then we're tense, and then we're playing a little bit more defensively instead of when I'm in this situation, again, when my team has the ball, I do this. When my team doesn't have the ball, I do that. If we don't have an alternative place to put our attention, we will be bullied by those thoughts and feelings. We'll be dominated by them. I think that's the difference between reacting and responding. Responding is I'm still feeling those negative thoughts. I'm still feeling those negative emotions. I'm still hearing those negative thoughts, but I'm very clear on what my performance responsibilities are. I'm very clear on my own personal values that I can even bring into the game. And I'm going to put my attention on those things. This may piss people off, but I learned this from a guy who's been in the field of psychology, a mentor of mine, Dr. Stephen Hayes, and he told me one time, positive affirmations are great as long as you don't need them. Like when things are going well, you don't need positive affirmations. But when you're really under pressure, I don't know, like phrases like "I've got this" and "I believe." I don't think they really narrow our attention down onto what we should be doing. And a lot of times we spend so much time fighting with our own thoughts and feelings instead of just accepting that sometimes we're going to feel pretty shitty, excuse my language, when we perform. But that does not have to impact our overall performance if we learn some of these unhooking strategies.
That's really good. And that's come up in quite a few of my conversations with people, is to be less judgmental towards ourselves and our players about the emotions we experience. Just experience them. You're feeling whatever you're feeling, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. The question, though, is, like you talked about, the response piece of that. And I love the phrase stress fingerprints, and having players consider that. What things are likely to stress you out, to shake you mentally in a game? And I think what a great question for us to ask ourselves as coaches too, right? What things are likely to happen here that are totally going to throw me off of my game as the coach here? When athletes do this, I know this is something that can throw me off, right? And then considering beforehand, okay, when this happens, this is how I'm going to respond, right? When I have an athlete on my team that's on the bench and he's goofing off or making comments that whatever, like, how are you going to respond in that moment? Or when you have an athlete get a yellow card or a technical foul, how are you going to respond in that moment, right? Because again, if we don't consider it beforehand, it's just so hard in the moment, in sport that are so emotionally charged, to respond in a way that's aligned with our values.
And I think, this pro team that pro soccer team that I've worked with over the last year, the coach and I talked quite a bit about identifying moments in the game to come back to center on some of these things. For example, a throw-in, that's a natural stoppage. And so even if it's just for a second before that ball's thrown in, recognizing the symbol that play is stopped for a minute. Where is my mind right now? Where is my attention right now? When it's really hot and there are mandated water breaks, he worked very deliberately on having his team kind of jog over so they could not only get the water break in, but they could also kind of have that mental reset as well.
That's really good. And we have a few minutes left, Ben. One of the things I'm just personally really curious about, as someone who played baseball through high school, baseball is such a failure-filled sport. I mean, you hit 300, you fail 70% of the time, and you're a Hall of Famer, right? I'm just really curious what it was like being the head of mental performance for the Blue Jays. Maybe some of the learnings that you had, or some of the things that you guys found really worked well with those professional athletes in a sport filled with so much failure. And I mean, the mental side of the game is big in every sport, but just massive in baseball.
Sure. The biggest thing that I learned, over and over and over, and I was very, excuse me, I was very lucky to be around a lot of good people. I was an outsider coming into baseball, and I had people really kind of mentor me on the ins and outs of the games, and uh, it's so hard to play the game. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that I learned is it is such a difficult part of sport. And then it's also the only sport where you literally play every day. And those two things are just fascinating to me, the high failure rates and then the frequency. So one, we treat, especially, they're pro athletes. We treat them as the experts on themselves. Our department, it was an offering. In early days, it was a part of spring training. Over time, we learned, let's be really clear on what we do, right? Which is we teach those emotional and attentional regulation strategies. But also, let's just be world-class at listening because every player, every athlete needs something a little bit different. And that's where I just love the training that folks get in sport, performance, clinical psychology, is they are really trained to listen well and done well through the types of questions that we ask, how we might affirm some things that we're seeing and hearing, reflecting things back to athletes. Time and time again, I've found that they found their own best answers on what they need to do, and we just let go of any idea that we were there to solve any of their challenges. So I think it was meeting players where they are. I think it was having a deep empathy for how hard it is to play the game. And I think, when they were open to it, you might offer, you might offer some mindfulness. You might ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are they in their routine? And if it was, let's say a 6, and you ask, what needs work, and they were able to dial it in a little bit more, and that influenced how they spent 10 or 15 minutes differently preparing. Again, you're empowering them to come up with their own answers, and also just being a place where they can come and be themselves. I mean, I could go on and on that, and I think baseball is absolutely getting it right in that almost every team has full-time sport and performance psychology coaches that are working on their staffs, not just for the players, but for the coaches as well. It's a long season.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point that you talked about, like the high failure rates and the frequency, which, I kind of think that it's probably a great thing that they do play so often, because it's like, hey, you really can't dwell on last night very much because you got to play again tomorrow night, right? And just the reality of, especially in that sport, it's like, man, if you have a rough game, you've got another opportunity quickly.
I think instead of saying you can't dwell, I'd be curious on what does that dwelling cost you?
Yeah.
Right. So does it cost you sleep? And how will that impact performance the next day? Does it influence your mood coming into the clubhouse and the locker room environment? Because that could impact your performance. So again, I think questions like that, instead of saying you can't dwell, it's letting them come up with their own understanding of what's that costing them, and that actually it's hurting the very thing they crave, which is consistency in performance.
That's really good. And I'm challenged, one, by the correction of that question, because I totally see where you're coming from on that too. But then personally, what you talked about earlier, the writing reflex and listening, I'm not great at that yet in my marriage. So I'm thinking about, man, I got to get better at those two things.
It's a whole nother podcast,
with
brother.
my wife and kids, So, I love that. And I love that framing of the question, what is this costing you, staying attached to this failure or struggle? I think that's really, really powerful. I've got 3 super quick rapid fire questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here. The first one is this, and you can answer about either your coaching experience or your current work as a mental performance coach. The most fun part of coaching is
watching people achieve their success, achieve their goals, just having a front line, a front row seat on somebody achieving something they've set out to do. A massive blessing.
I wish I would have known blank before I started coaching.
Mindfulness.
That's really good. And the last one, I know I'm successful as a coach when
players are empowered to make their own decisions and experience success, seeing the confidence that can come from empowering them to do it on their own. The second would be getting invited to their weddings.
That's really good. That's awesome. Well, Ben, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap it up, just share with people where they can connect with you.
So I got to do a better job at that. First off, I on Instagram, I'm Ready, Set, Resilient. The biggest thing I want people to know, Luke, is what my company, University for Health and Performance, is doing for veterans. Please Google University for Health and Performance. We're located in Northwest Arkansas, and our company is a catalyst for purpose. We are helping veterans connect with and strengthen who they are and what they do after their time in service. We teach a 4-pillar educational approach called Think, Move Your Mind, Train, Move Your Body, Feel, Know Your Emotions, Lead, Live Your Values. And I definitely would encourage anybody listening to that to look more into University of Health and Performance, especially if you are a veteran. Please reach out to us about that. And then my email is Ben C. Freakley, Freakley @gmail.com. And then my Twitter is @BC Freakley.
Awesome. Ben, thanks a ton for your time, and I appreciate all that you shared with us.
Thank you, Luke.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Ben for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast. I've got 3 takeaways from this episode. Number 1, avoid the writing reflex. Like Ben said, quote, the more we do that, the more we take away an athlete or human being's ability to solve their own problems. This is hard to avoid, but I know it's something that's really important if we want to help our athletes grow as people. Number 2 are the questions Ben shared that we can ask a player when they're struggling. Like, what are 2 or 3 things you can do offensively to help our team? Or what are 2 or 3 things you can do defensively to help our team? Like Ben talked about, there's a lot of power in narrowing our attention to what we can control and helping our athletes do the same. And number 3, be world-class at listening. I loved hearing about their approach when Ben was with the Blue Jays. Every player needs something a little bit different to improve their regulation of their attention and emotion. So we need to get good at listening and staying curious with our questions so that we can help them find those answers. And hey, don't forget to check out summercoachingseries.com to learn more or get access to the event we're hosting this summer that will help you grow as a coach. I hope to see you this summer. Thanks for listening to the podcast.